Well, China's National Congress has announced a boost to the country's defense budget for a second year in a row, as its military threatens to crack down on Taiwanese separatism. The announcement comes as the annual National People's Congress wrapped up in Beijing. Jonathan Cheng is the China bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal, and he joins me now from the Chinese capital. Jonathan, good to have you with us this evening. Now, firstly, what does China's defense ministry mean by saying it has to confront the world's most complex security environment in justifying its increase in defense spending?
Well, you put yourself in Xi Jinping's shoes in Beijing, and you look all around and you have U.S. bases in South Korea, in Japan, in the Philippines. You have Australia, which is closely allied with the U.S. You have India, which is a country with which there's been a lot of historic friction. South China Sea and a lot of the countries down there are also there are lots of territorial disputes there as well. You have Russia and North Korea to the north, and even though they're friends of yours, they're both unpredictable factors as well. So I think that's what they're speaking of. But of course, what they're really saying is the U.S. They're an ocean away, but they have a big footprint in the region.
Yes, and how much of that defense spending will also be devoted to Taiwan, having said that it wants to, quote, tighten the noose around Taiwan if it advances on separatism?
Well, there's no question that Taiwan is the single biggest political issue for Xi Jinping and his top lieutenants. This is something that the Communist Party has been really fixated on since 1949. It was the one island, the one piece of the puzzle that got away from them. And so they want to finish that job. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not Donald Trump, whether the current U.S. administration would intervene in the event of a conflict. And we know that it may be that there's a deliberate plan, an invasion attack, but there could also be an incident where you have the two militaries, or China's military with any other military in the region, having a close encounter, which leads to an escalation.
Yes, this is also being watched quite closely here in Australia, in our immediate region, because of those unprecedented Navy exercises in the Tasman Sea. So would a boost to Beijing's defense budget also mean more of such exercises in this part of the world, but noting that they all occurred in international waters?
Yeah, there's no question that China is wanting to show the world, but also to test its own military and extend its capabilities and show that it isn't simply going to be confined to its immediate backyard. And I think definitely what we saw between Australia and New Zealand there was a signal. You just had the Chinese and the Russian militaries approaching Alaska together for the first time ever, according to the U.S. And you also had the Russians and the Chinese together sailing, basically doing a circumnavigation of the Japanese main islands. And all of these are things that wouldn't have happened 5-10 years ago. And it really shows the enhanced capabilities and the enhanced ambitions that China really has.
And do you see that as, the China's naval ambitions as to being one that is in line with, I suppose, Russia's naval ambitions?
Well, I mean, Russia obviously has a bigger fight on its hands in Ukraine. And, it obviously neighbors China. Actually, the two countries haven't always been so close. They did have a lot of tension in the 60s and in the 70s, but now they've really patched things up and they really seem to be in stride with one another. Obviously, their ambitions are going to be a little bit different, but they do align to a great degree here. And I think they're looking at the U.S. and they see a common adversary, but they also see opportunity here because this is a very disruptive presidency. It's a different approach, and we'll see really how the map refigures itself. Because I think Donald Trump is keeping everybody on their toes right now.
Okay, Jonathan, let's move away from security for now. Xi Jinping, he is desperate to boost the country's economy with a target of 5% growth. He's confident of that. So beyond the stimulus that has been introduced so far, how is China aiming to get to that target?
Yeah, well, I mean, they definitely are looking to stimulate a little bit. What they've done in the past is they've really relied on exports for the last couple of years. You see the electric vehicles, the solar panels, all the made in China goods are really flooding the rest of the world, and that's been great for China's economy. The problem now is that we're in a new trade environment where tariff walls are going up everywhere, and it's not just the U.S. A lot of other countries have put up tariff barriers to Chinese goods. And so if that's going to be closed off to you, then you need another engine of growth. And so the answer, it seems, is domestic consumption. That's something that economists have been saying China should be doing for years, but we heard it in the National People's Congress over the past week, where China's own leaders were starting to say, we really do need to boost consumption here. So we'll see whether or not they succeed or not, but certainly rhetorically, that's the direction they're heading in.
Yes, but for now, at the moment, they're going to have to deal with those trade tariffs in the U.S. and how much they progress. Can we safely assume that this was factored into their targets for economic growth?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, they don't tell us how they get to this projection, these calculations. And of course, nobody knows how high tariffs will go. Nobody knows exactly how this trade war will play out. So look, if Xi Jinping is able to strike a deal with Donald Trump and forestall some of these tariffs, then maybe they don't need to worry so much about this. But let's say the worst case scenario does happen and they aren't able to sell to the U.S. and to many other Western countries, then it's going to be a different scenario. So we'll have to see. And I think people in Beijing here, the leaders, are also looking nervously, anxiously at how this all plays out.
And do you think China, perhaps seeing what's happening with the U.S., may need to kind of strike a more conciliatory tone with all its other trade partners, and Australia being one of them?
Yeah, well, we did see that rapprochement between Beijing and Canberra. They've done similar sort of things with Europe, with India, with Japan, because I don't think they want to be fighting, metaphorically, fighting on several fronts at the same time. I think the U.S. is the world's largest economy, and that alone is going to be a big handful for China. So I don't think they're looking to pick unnecessary fights elsewhere. And I think instead what they want to do is they want to mend fences.
And Jonathan, I just wanted to get your thoughts on when it comes for Xi Jinping to deal with the new administration that's in the White House, noting that the official line from Beijing was that, quote, if war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war or trade war or any type of war, we are ready to fight till the end. What can we expect in the next 4 years? Yeah,
well, I think that highlighting that quote, I think, is definitely a very smart thing to do. And I think China needs to also manage expectations of the 1.4 billion people it has itself. And they can't be seen to be backing down or showing any weakness. You saw how Canada and Mexico were very quick to reach out to the president and try and find some way to make peace. But you haven't really seen that yet with China. And I think it's partly because they need to say, look, we're the world's #2 economy. We have 1.4 billion people, and we are a historic great empire, and we want to be there again. So we can't be seen sort of trying to cozy up to Donald Trump here. So, that masks some of the deep, challenges that they will face here. But nonetheless, they need to show that. And I wonder whether that will lead them to have to take a tougher stance than perhaps they're comfortable with privately.
Yes. Okay, Jonathan Cheng, really good to get your insights and thoughts there from Beijing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.